What he said when I first got diagnosed was, "You're the same today as you were yesterday."
Oh, yeah.
Then we've always said, it's not something that's happening to Rebecca. It's something that we deal with together. It's not her issue. It's our issue.
Welcome to This Way Up. We are bringing you engaging, informative, and inspiring conversations surrounding all aspects of mental health from the perspective of us as parents and caregivers. I'm Andrea Nanijian.
And I'm Emmy Waters. When someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, this can be an incredibly stressful and challenging time. So we're here to provide valuable resources to support you as you navigate this journey.
Today's guest, Rebecca Chamaa, gives us a sneak peek as to what it's like to live with schizophrenia and what it's like for a caregiver to care for a person that has schizophrenia, and then what it's like to be that person. It was really heartfelt and tugs at the heartstrings.
Yeah, I really appreciate her honesty and openness to talk about something so incredibly personal. And what she shares is what started out as very, and has been a very private circumstance for her small family. So I think we all get a glimpse into true bravery.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca Chamaa is a freelance writer with bylines in Glamour, Business Insider, and other national publications. She's an online writing instructor at Writers Inc. She is a public speaker for NAMI's In Our Own Voice program. She holds a certificate in narrative medicine from Columbia University and is a facilitator for the Northwest Narrative Medicine Collaborative. She has been married for 25 years and lives with chronic paranoid schizophrenia. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Rebecca, we would love to start by just hearing a little bit about your personal story and your diagnosis.
Okay. So at about 27 or 28 years old, I started becoming increasingly paranoid. So I thought that people in my small town were out to get me, and I thought there was a conspiracy against me. I stopped sleeping and I stopped eating. I went without treatment for a while, and then eventually I did agree to go into a psychiatric facility, and I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features. I don't even know if they give that diagnosis anymore, but we're talking about a long time ago. So I lived with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder with psychotic features until I was almost 40, I think. A psychiatrist that I was seeing said, "There's something wrong with your diagnosis." And he was right. There was something wrong with my diagnosis. He said, "Your mood is always stable. I'm not seeing any mania. I'm not seeing any depression. And I'm obviously not seeing any psychosis." And at the time, I was the most productive I've ever been in my life. I was working full time. I sat on the city council. I hiked with friends. I biked with friends. I was involved with a lot of nonprofits. I just was it was the most productive time of my life. So he took me off all medication. And within a year, I was acutely psychotic. And at that time, they put me back on medication, but the medication wasn't working. I still heard voices. I heard those voices for 6 months. After 6 months, I had just a breakthrough of insight, just a very brief moment of insight that said, I need to go back to the doctor. So I called my husband at work, and he took me back to the doctor and in the emergency room. And I told the doctor, I was honest with him. I said, I'm hearing voices. And he said, I'm comfortable upping your antipsychotic a little bit. So he upped it a little bit. And then I got into the system here in San Diego, started seeing a new psychiatrist who diagnosed me then pretty swiftly with chronic paranoid schizophrenia. And I've had that diagnosis ever since. An average day for me looks like maybe olfactory hallucinations. Like, I don't know if your viewers know this, but you can hallucinate through all 5 of your senses. You can hear things, you can see things, you can feel things like something crawling across your skin or spiders under your skin or something like that. So that's a tactile hallucination. Mm-hmm. And then, you can smell things and you can taste things. Not everyone experiences all those kinds of hallucinations. Like I rarely experience anything visual. But I do frequently and always, when I'm psychotic, have voices. But an average day for me looks like maybe I'll have an olfactory hallucination. So maybe I'll just be sitting at the computer and smell fire. And then if my husband's home, I will just ask him, do you smell fire? And if he says no, that's good enough for me to know that it's a symptom of my schizophrenia. If he's not home, I usually go out in the hallway and smell by my neighbor's doors because fire is something that's real and it's not an imagined thing that it could happen. So that is one thing I investigate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because it is a real threat, right? I live in a unit with a lot of other people and they overcook things and they do things. So it is a real threat. So there's that. And then what else might happen to me on a daily basis, even when I'm doing well, is I have a lot of paranoia around food. What that looks like is a lot of people love new tastes and new flavors and going out and taking pictures on Instagram of all the new foods they're taking. That's not me. That's
Okay.
completely and totally not me. I don't like new flavors. I like to eat the same things on a pretty regular basis, and I like for them to taste the same way. So if I taste something that I haven't tasted before, I usually say to my husband, we have kind of a go-to thing, especially if we're out in public, always if we're out in public. But at home, it's a little bit different. But if we're out in public, I will say, this tastes funny to me. And that's a cue to my husband that he knows that I'm feeling paranoid. So, and by the paranoia, I mean that I think the food is poisoned, or I think that the food will make me sick, will give me food poisoning or something. So he usually tastes it and says that tastes fine to me. And sometimes that's enough for me to eat the food. Other times it's not enough for me to eat the food. And he will have ordered something that I will eat and he'll say, okay, I'll switch meals with you. And he'll switch meals with me. And the reason he does that is so that all of my friends know that I have schizophrenia, but we don't like to make it the focus of what we do. And I don't like to be embarrassed, out in public about my symptoms or anything like that. So we'll do that just to be as discreet as possible. And it's super sweet of my husband to do that. But that's like an average day for me that might be symptoms that I would have on an average day, even when I'm doing well. So those are the kind of things. And then anxiety. I have an anxiety disorder as well. And that is probably more debilitating to me than those symptoms of the paranoia and the olfactory hallucinations. It is debilitating. I frequently change plans. I will be ready to go somewhere and I'll just say, I can't do it. I cannot do it. So I feel bad for my husband because he frequently tries not to get excited about anything anymore, because he knows that there's a high likelihood that I won't be able to go through with the plans and go and do it. So I feel bad about that because that's sad. Does that give you an idea a little bit about what living with schizophrenia looks like for me?
Oh, absolutely.
You were very descriptive. Thank you. I want to take us back just a little bit because you just gave so much detail there. And I'm like, I'm just so curious about things. Early on, you said when you were first diagnosed, one, that you were having some symptoms and such. I'm wondering, how did you know that you were seeing things and hearing things and not knowing what was real and what wasn't real?
Well, I've never had severe visual hallucination.
Okay.
So the first episode was just paranoia and thoughts of conspiracy and stuff like that. I did not hear voices my first episode.
Now, did you know that those feelings that you had were not rational, or that did you have a feeling that something was wrong, I guess is?
Yes. So
Okay.
I thought that I was being poisoned, because in the psych ward, I would take my bed sheets off of the bed, even though the nurses kept telling me over and over and over again, stop taking your bed sheets off. And they got really irritated with me, but I couldn't because I thought I was being poisoned through the bed sheets. So I literally, in order to keep myself safe, took the bed sheets off and just let them get upset with me. So I did think that something was wrong with my mind, but I thought I was being poisoned. I did not have any experience to think, oh, I'm having an episode, or oh, I'm developing a mental illness, or I've had an onset, I should say, an onset of mental illness. I did not know that. I thought I was being poisoned. Drugged. I thought I was being drugged with drugs by someone, and I had all kinds of ideas about who that might be. But so because I was so paranoid.
That must have been so scary. Even if that was really what was happening, if that was your reality, that you were being poisoned, that would be terrifying.
Yeah, actually, I'm incorrect when I say poisoned, because I really thought it was drugs, like some kind of hallucinogenic drug.
Oh, interesting.
At one point, I told my brother, when he was trying to get me into a hospital, I said, they're going to take me behind those doors and shoot me up with heroin. And my brother was like, tell the nurse that you just said that. And I'm like, no, I'm just telling you because I trusted my family. Mm-hmm. This would change later in subsequent episodes. I would become distrustful of my family. But in the initial one, when it wasn't as severe, I did trust my family, and I would tell them about my delusions and the paranoia. And then I would turn to a nurse and say, no, I'm fine. And my brother would say, she just said all this. And I'd be like, no, I'm fine. I don't think that.
Yeah. You were scared.
Yeah. Very scared.
What did that the initial diagnosis feel like to you? Was that comforting? Was that scary? How did you receive that?
I didn't receive it well at all. I was a social worker at the time, and we're talking about a lot of years ago. And so there was still a lot of stigma. And I had internalized stigma, especially about what mental illness meant. I was not treatment compliant in the beginning. I did not take my meds as prescribed, and I would go on and off of them. And this is really bad for the long-term prognosis for an illness, is not taking and getting treatment as soon as possible. But I would not take my medication as prescribed. And so because of that, I would go in and out of psychosis on a regular basis. And the reason I started taking my medication seriously and then did so well, where I said I was so productive for like 10 years, was because I met my husband. And I knew if we were going to have a fighting chance at making something last a long time, I would need to take my treatment seriously. So I did start taking my treatment seriously, and we did well. I mean, we traveled internationally. Those 10 years were like I didn't have a mental illness. It's not a surprise that the doctor didn't think I had one. I really was in recovery for 10 years and did really well. But I'll have to say that last episode, the psychosis, the acute psychosis, where I was psychotic for 6 months, impaired some of my function, some of my cognitive functioning, and also impaired some of my ability to live life. I'm not nearly as productive. I'm not nearly as social. It impacted me significantly in negative ways to be psychotic for that long of a period of time.
How long was that you were psychotic, the last episode?
6 months.
Wow. And what implications did that have? I think about to a relationship, and you were doing so well for 10 years. And that's wonderful because then you were able to establish a foundation. But how did that impact your friendship and your marriage with your husband during that time, that 6 months? That had to have been grueling on him as well.
So how it impacted my relationship with my husband, I think it's heartbreaking. I don't think people consider this sometimes, but I think it's heartbreaking for family members, like in a way that is loaded with grief and loaded with pain, to see a loved one that you know so well and that you've relied on and that you've counted on, and that it is part of your rock and your foundation, all of a sudden distrust you and all of a sudden become another person. So there's a lot of grieving that goes on because you don't know if they're coming back.
Right.
You don't know if they're going to recover. And it's not the person that you knew. It's not the person that you fell in love with. Although you know they're in there somewhere, it doesn't look anything like the person that you've come to love and to know. So I think that for families, it's super hard because there's a lot of grieving involved in that. I think there's a lot of heartache involved in that. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I'm going to flip the question a little bit here. When you were in your last episode, how did that impact you towards your marriage, towards your husband? You know, you said there was a lot of distrust and such. Did you still feel, I don't know, love and affection towards him, even though?
No. So I ran away from home and he followed me by my credit card. And I thought that we were having all kinds of problems, and I created all kinds of problems, not on purpose, of course.
Sure.
And then, I had plans to divorce him. We were splitting up our financial portfolio and everything. I didn't feel the same way about him at all. I mean, I was paranoid. I heard voices all the time. And then I hear, this is really something that people might not be aware of, but one of the things a doctor will ask you when they find out you're hearing voices are, do they tell you to do things? And the answer for me, unfortunately, is yes, they tell me to do things. It's an unfortunate situation because it's a dangerous situation to do things that a voice that's mentally ill is telling you to do, right? So they're called command voices. And the other thing the doctor will ask is, do you do what they tell you to do? And so they'll ask you, do they tell you to do something? And the answer for me is yes. And do you do what they tell you to do? And the answer for me is also yes. So it puts my life at risk because the voices will tell me to jump off a bridge or they'll tell me to take all my medication, both of which I've done. I didn't jump off the bridge.
Okay.
Someone stopped me from doing that, but I did go to the bridge and did. So my voices are definitely a risk to my safety and to my life, actually. Mm-hmm. So I got off on a little tangent there, but I was just trying to give people an idea of what living with schizophrenia is like.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's all very personal. And I just think you are incredibly brave to make such honest, tender statements about yourself, but also your family. And I really appreciate what you said about how you understand your family's perspective of you as a member of their tribe and someone that they love. And you said how you can recognize how they see you change or shift. What kind of support have your family members had in context of your mental illness and this decade plus journey?
So really sad. My family hasn't had any real support. I could direct them in the way of support if they thought they needed it. And my husband and I kept my diagnosis a secret for 20 years. We didn't tell his family. We didn't tell our friends. We didn't tell anyone. It was just he and I, like an island by ourselves, dealing with something as big as schizophrenia and hiding any episodes that I might have or any symptoms that I might have. So I feel a lot of compassion towards my husband because some of those months were probably the hardest of his life. And he had no one to talk to. He had no one that he could go to or anything. And he's a very private person, very private. Like, he's shocked that I can talk about these things. He would never talk about these things. So he doesn't want to go to counseling and he doesn't want to get support, but he does go with me on public speaking engagements where I talk about these things. And he is so supportive of that. And I think that's a healing thing for him to be able to hear me talk about what it's like for him and understanding what it's like for him and put words to some of the most difficult times of our lives. And he gets to hear that. And I think that's healing for him. I think that kind of replaces his need for a support group or something like that.
Well, you two sound like you are really quite a team together. I mean, both coming from such empathetic places for one another and compassion for one another. You had mentioned that you kept it a secret for a long time. Both of you kept it a secret, which I could only imagine would have been very lonely and hard. What made you break the silence?
So I had a psychiatrist. She was a lovely doctor, one of my favorites that I've had so far. And she said, I want you to tell one person that you have schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband and I talked about it for months. I said, my doctor wants me to tell one person that I have schizophrenia. We decided to tell a friend of ours who's a therapist. He's still a friend that's a therapist. We thought that he would be the best choice for us to tell. And it went really well. We went to brunch and we said, we have something to tell you. Rebecca has schizophrenia. And he had a few questions and seemed a little agitated. And the only thing I can say is that the whole brunch was not about that. I mean, we went back to talking about all the other things. So that gave me a lot of confidence. But at the same time, I do understand that many of the people that I hid that from felt betrayed because they had known me, some of them for 20, some of them for 30, some of them for 40 years, and did not know that about me. And so they felt like, did I ever really know you?
If you had to do it all over again in the realm of how you communicated with family and friends, what would you do differently, if anything at all?
I just wasn't ready to do it. So I don't think I could do it differently. And I would want my husband to be able to talk to somebody. That's the thing I would change. I would make sure that he got some support somehow from either friends or family or from someone so that he could talk about his experience and let some of that pressure out. But for me personally, I had so much self-stigma and so much internalized stigma that I couldn't have done it any different than I did.
Oh, I understand that. Curating these valuable conversations is really about our shared passion for promoting mental wellness. Behind the scenes, however, there are some platforms and systems we utilize that cost money that help bring these episodes to you.
If you found value in our conversations and feel inspired to support, consider making a donation. Whether it's the price of your morning cup of coffee or more, your contribution directly supports our ability to keep connecting, sharing, and growing. Please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com to support this community. We thank you and we appreciate you. You know, one of the reasons that Emmy and I did this podcast was because we wanted to have a support system for caregivers or parents. And initially, we looked at this podcast as being for parents, but caregivers is such a huge piece to this too. And it's so heartwarming for me to hear you care so much about what your husband went through as a partner in all of this. It's very touching. And I think one of the things that you stressed, and I think we will continue to stress as we go through this, is the importance of them getting help as well, because it's just as hard, maybe not just as hard, it's hard in a different way to caregive to somebody who is struggling and somebody that you love so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And I usually talk about it in all my public speaking engagements, how hard it is for families, because it's heartbreaking in numerous ways, because, you know, you don't have complete control over their care, even though they're unable to care for themselves. If they're 18, they have say over their care. And so you can sit by and watch them deteriorate and have struggles and not be able to do anything.
That's
So,
very hard.
yeah, there's just all kinds of real barriers for family, and it's just heartbreak upon heartbreak.
How did your husband take time for himself or care for himself, or what was his outlet? He must have had some type of outlet.
Work.
Oh gosh. I guess that's valid.
He's a workhorse. Yeah, he's a very hard worker. I don't know anyone who works harder than my husband. So that is probably what he buried himself in.
Yeah. When you and I first spoke, one of the things that just touched me was when you said, when you got that diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, that your husband said, it's our illness. I mean, he seems like he took you by the hand from the very beginning. And what a blessing.
Yeah, what he said when I first got diagnosed was because I came home and I was devastated. I was in shock. And he said, "You're the same today as you were yesterday."
Oh, yeah.
That's what he said. "You're the same today as you were yesterday." And then we've always said it's not something that's happening to Rebecca. It's something that we deal with together. It's not her issue. It's our issue.
How important is that to you?
It's super important. I mean, I feel, well, no doubt. It's not even that I feel, it's a fact that I would not be able to live as productive a life or as rewarding a life or feel the kind of joy I feel, even though I struggle, if I did not have my husband's support, because he does a lot for me.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And Rebecca and Andrea, this is such a beautiful conversation that we're even kind of going this way, because Rebecca, what you're saying is what we've read so many studies about in terms of companionship and certainly partnership as an indicator of longevity and happiness, right? We see a lot of those studies, but also what you said earlier when you're explaining a little bit about your journey and how you became accountable with this relationship that meant so much to you when you first got together. And I love thinking about that as a sense of purpose is how I received that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to think about just for all of us in all aspects of life, but how important it is to have your person, your partner, or if a different family member, that support and somebody to live for, with, live up to, however you describe that. It's that's what I'm getting from you so powerfully.
Yeah, but I know I belong to several communities of people with schizophrenia, and I know that I have single friends with schizophrenia, and pets can be a great support as well. I mean, because not everyone's going to get married, right?
Sure.
Such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so not everyone has that in mind, and it's not going to happen for everyone because it just doesn't happen for everyone. Whether you have schizophrenia or not, it just doesn't.
Well, I think when you get down to it, though, it's that it's helpful to have some sort of companionship or support network wherever you can have that outlet. And like you said, there's going to be people that don't want to be married. You know, and we were speaking to somebody a few weeks ago regarding insurance of all things. And she had said that now there's a lot of peer-to-peer type of groups that are out there. So people that are struggling with mental illness can go to a quote unquote therapeutic session with their peers. So then they have another connecting point. And I think that piece of connection is what is important to keeping somebody feeling supported and healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a big push, and California passed it. I don't know what other states passed it. Maybe all of them, but I'm not sure. But you can now become certified as a peer support specialist. And there are many paying positions. Now it's a requirement at many nonprofits to have a certain amount of peer counselors.
You know, Emmy, we said from the moment we connected just, last year was if we had one another, and we would have known what was going on in each other's lives, how much healthier we would have been 10 years ago when we were addressing these situations.
100%. Yeah. Having a community and having somebody who gets you, that's the name of the game, right? That's why we got together, of course. I think just having somebody to even bounce ideas off of, and then Rebecca, like in your case, gosh, having somebody see you honestly, truly, fully, and having that unconditional love is such a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to go back to the peer-to-peer. You said they're different than counselors. And I don't know if I'm, I don't know, telling everybody what is so blatantly clear on this, but they are absolutely different than counselors because they've actually lived the experience. Whereas a counselor, is you can get help from a counselor, you can get guidance from a counselor. But when somebody is going through a very similar situation, there is a lot of validation. There is a lot of connectedness that happens just because you're like, okay, you get it. You really understand.
That's true. Having somebody who's been there, makes a big, huge difference.
They also don't require the same amount of training as a counselor. I think I would like to make that clear too. They're not therapists. They don't have that kind of background or training, and they're certainly not psychiatrists. So
yeah, that's a good point.
They're helpful in another way, and you're right. And it is that way of understanding exactly or closely what it can look like to live with a mental illness.
Yeah, because I think one of the differentiators is that a counselor or therapist is going to deal with more clinical situations, deep-seated traumas, and that sort of thing.
You are a representative, I know, for what we'll refer to as NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illnesses. I don't think a lot of people know about that. Can you share about what services they provide and what it is?
Yeah, so NAMI is a great organization. It's been around for decades, and it was started by family members. And they have training for family members and support group for family members of people that are caregivers or have a loved one with a mental illness. And then they have a wide variety of programs. My local NAMI, I don't know how many do this, but my local NAMI also trains and does that certification process for peer support specialists.
Oh.
And they also offer peer groups so that people can get support from peers. And they also offer a warm line where people can call just to talk to other people. So the big things they offer is education to family and support groups to family, and then education and support groups to people with lived experience. And I have a job with NAMI as a public speaker. It's called In Our Own Voices. And we go about the community and we tell our stories and try to be the face of someone with mental illness in order to break down stigmas and to give people services, let them know that NAMI exists and what they offer, but also just to be a human face for mental illness and to break down that stigma. One of the places that I go on a monthly basis is to the police academy and talk to the police about what it's like to live with schizophrenia.
Can you share a little bit about what you tell police officers? Because I think that the general public would be curious as to what it feels like.
So I tell them, you're meeting me on a good day, but if you were to meet me on a bad day, one of my worst days, then it would look very different. And I might not be able to follow directions because I would be distracted by voices and other stimuli that's coming from my mind. And I might not be able to track what you're saying. I might not be able to, if you told me to sit down, I might not be able to do that. I might not hear you, for one. And two, the voices might be telling me, don't do that, they're going to hurt you, or in any number of things. So I tell them about how I care about their safety and that I think that they need to make choices based on their safety and the community safety first. But I also tell them what it's like from my perspective to be psychotic and what that might look like if they interacted with me on the street when I was psychotic, because they are. Unfortunately, no one wants them to be in this position. They don't want to be in this position, and no one else wants them to be in this position, but they are the first responders to a mental health crisis. So I try to give them the tools to understand what that can look like, because they run into it all the time, right? They're on the street and they interact with people who are homeless and people who are suffering from a mental illness or having a mental health crisis. They always want to know what they can say. They ask the best questions. They ask the most empathetic and best questions of any group that I deal with. They want to know what they can say to help us keep, someone safe. And I don't always have a suggestion for that, but yeah, does that give you some idea?
Yeah. What are some of the other questions you get from them?
I can't think of any specific ones other than they always ask me what to say to someone in a mental health crisis. They all ask that one. I get asked that every single time.
What do you say? What's the answer?
I say, well, I don't have an answer that is good for everyone, but I do say if you can ask them if they have a pet that they need taken care of, is there someone that they can call for the person? Do they need a glass of water? Do they want to sit down? Anything that would get them based in reality instead of in their delusions or the voices or whatever they might be hallucinating at the time.
Oh,
So
so
any grounding, anything that might get them focused on what's happening at the moment instead of what's happening inside their head. And I'm not saying that will be 100% foolproof. It won't be, but it might help get someone to be able to focus enough so that you could help them.
Mm-hmm. So when you're in an episode, are there times that you are not delusional? Do you go in and out of delusions? I'm just confused
When I was psychotic for 6 months, I heard voices the whole time. The whole 6 months, the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have a friend who lives with schizophrenia, and he hears voices no matter if he's on medication or not. He hears voices all the time, 24/7.
Wow.
So he has to learn to live with hearing that kind of background noise all the time. I don't know if you're familiar with Anderson Cooper, the journalist. He wore some headphones. He was supposed to wear them for 24 hours. Are you familiar with this one?
Go ahead and tell it though. That's so interesting.
Yeah, they put the background noise in the headphones of what someone with schizophrenia would have to listen to for 24 hours. Anderson Cooper couldn't wear them for very long at all. He said, "This makes me crazy," I mean, he probably didn't use that word, but he said, I can't do this. This is awful. And I know people that live with that all the time.
My gosh.
It's got to be so exhausting.
There's nothing funny about psychosis. Nothing. It's a horrible situation, and it can be absolutely terrifying. And for most people, it does become terrifying, at least at some point. But I will tell you that this is the closest story I have to letting people know that people that are psychotic are not always dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And is that I believed the last time that I was psychotic that I was a healer, and I believed everything that I cooked would make someone well. So I had a mailman at that time who had colon cancer, and I would bake him a half a cake every day. And I baked cakes all day long, every day.
Oh my gosh.
That's so sweet.
And our apartment building smelled like a bakery, and you could just smell it. And I would give my neighbors cakes all the time. I don't know what those people did with all that cake. I mean, I would bring it to them every day because I thought it was healing them. So,
oh my gosh, I love that.
That's so sweet.
So I was constantly listening to the voices tell me how to make the cakes. I would add cherries or strawberries or sprinkles or nuts or whatever the voices would tell me to add to the cakes. And I thought I was a healer. And so I was baking cakes. I was not, I always say this is what I always say when I'm giving a public speech and this comes up. I always say, and forgive the use of the word crazy, but I always say I wasn't the crazy cat lady. I was the crazy cake lady.
Aw. Does proper use, do certain words trigger you ever? Because I appreciate that, you'll make light of even using the word crazy, but are there any words that would trigger you or not sit well?
I don't love the word schizophrenic. I don't love that word. I don't love to, I mean, I understand that there's some situations where you have to almost use it like to describe a situation or to describe what someone has, like instead, people will use it, like my brother used it today. He said, if you think the pandemic was bad for you, you should try being a schizophrenic or something like that. I don't love that word. I would prefer people say be someone with schizophrenia because I just
heard that,
feel like, but I'm not, I used to be really serious about it and really, I would correct people and be hardcore about it, but I'm not anymore. I'm like, if they use it, they use it. I know that they mean no harm and I know that it's easier to use sometimes. And in some situation, it almost sounds better. So, but I don't love that word. And I don't love the word crazy, but I do use it sometimes because it doesn't have to do anything with mental health really anymore. I mean, it's been so, we use it for everything. Like, that's crazy good,
We do. Yeah, exactly.
That's a crazy cake. It's so delicious.
Right.
So it's not always, so I try not to be too particular about words because I don't know. I just feel like most people don't mean any harm by the words that they use.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you say that because Andrea and I talk about this all the time, right? I think it comes up every week on being responsible with the words that we're choosing to use, but also in society, there are a lot of particulars now, things to say and not say. So I really appreciate that you say, people mean no harm. And it's good for all of us to hear these things and to get the education and understand what it does mean to hear certain things from your perspective. So thank you.
Yeah.
You know what I think is just dawned on me here talking to you. You have been managing this illness for 30 years, 30 plus years?
Well, I'm 58 years old.
Okay, and you were diagnosed at 27.
Yes.
You have come from a place where mental illness was never talked about. And like you said, that there was a lot of stigma that went around. And really, it's only been the last 10 years that really it's kind of become even more talked about. You're kind of a pioneer going out there and sharing your story and the details of what it's like. You're brave. You're a pioneer in this.
You're our hero.
Thank you. I always tell the police officers, I'm an oldster in this game.
Yeah.
A lot of people with schizophrenia live a very short lifespan.
Oh, literally, you're saying you're old in this.
Yeah, I am kind of old. Yeah. Some of the studies have shown that people with schizophrenia live up to 25 years less than the average lifespan. But others say it's 10 years. So, I mean, go somewhere between that, I imagine. And it's because of because of lifestyle issues. It's because of, antipsychotics have a lot of side effects. And if you don't do all the things necessary to reduce the implication of the side effects, like high cholesterol, diabetes, all those things. And yeah, I've been around for a long time, and it was a different world when I got diagnosed.
Well, it means you're doing a lot of things right.
Thank you.
Well, Rebecca, we really appreciate your candor and your really touching story and your vulnerability. As we kind of phase out here, what advice would you give to parents and caregivers when they have a member of their family that they love that's dealing with a serious mental illness?
Well, I would say seek support through an agency like NAMI for instance. And I would say be gentle with yourself because it's heartbreaking, and get some support for grief because you're going to feel a lot of grief. And, know that the person isn't doing it to be a problem to you, and know that the person isn't doing it because of something. It's not their will to be doing it. It's not that they're being ornery or difficult or anything like that. It's that they have a brain disease, and that deserves some sympathy and empathy, and they need care as well. So make sure you take care of yourself, and then hopefully you can take care of your family member as well.
It's beautiful advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's conversation. To join our community and access more valuable resources, please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend. And to stay connected, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Listen to This Way Up.